because we get so caught up with what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve, what our next step is. I think very few of us take time to kind of look back retrospectively with a learning mindset.
Welcome to the OT podcast, which takes a deep dive into the topics affecting optometry today. Each time we'll find a real expert in their field and attempt to pull everything we can out of their brain so it may reside in yours. This is the 7th episode in the series, and we're recording on 28th of September 2023. You can listen to the other episodes on the OT website, on Apple or Spotify, or from your usual podcast provider. In our 7th episode, we'll be looking at how to fail successfully. My name's Kerry Smith-Janes. I'm an optometrist in independent practice in Lancashire, and I'm the clinical multimedia editor at Optometry Today. And also with me,
Ian Beasley. I'm also an optometrist, and I work for the AOP as Head of Education and also clinical editor of Optometry Today, and I'm also a visiting lecturer at Aston University. So in line with tradition during our podcast, Kerry, perhaps worth doing a mini plug for our current CPD offering through Optometry Today. So anything that's caught your eye at the moment?
New to Optometry Today at the moment is a new version of the clinical interpretation feature. We did used to call it VRIX and then image interpretation. So we've rebranded as clinical interpretation, and it's an online-only CPD feature. And the reason for that is it now features video clips. So this one is cases from the glaucoma clinic, and it's been authored by Kirsty Eagers and Lucy Andrews. And they've got some lovely images for you to look at and then answer questions, but also a really good video clip to interpret. So that's a nice, exciting new launch. In the pipeline, I'd just like to highlight the next CPD video as well. We filmed this at Aston University with Dr. Sonia Travejoate, and it's all about dry eye. And she's got some amazing bits of kit and lots of insight into treating those patients. And there's lots of sort of hands-on demonstrations as well. So I think that'll probably be really popular. And
as an added bonus, that video offers 2 interactive CPD points as well. So those that are short of interactive CPD can take a look at that video. My pick's an easy one, really, in terms of CPD articles in October, November. We've had a bit of an eyelid takeover for that edition. So we've got a series of 4 articles, and readers can pick and choose which articles they want to take. But I'd suggest probably completing them as a series. As I was editing and processing that article, some of the images were terrifying. So some fairly innocuous looking eyelid lesions that actually turned out to be basal cell carcinomas. So I think it's well worth practitioners consolidating their knowledge and having a look at the pretty and not so pretty eyelid lesions. So time for another short plug as well. So as you've alluded to already, Kerry, this theme of this podcast, and indeed the October-November edition of OT, is devoted to how to fail successfully. And I've helped pull together a piece where I bare my soul, really, of my biggest failure in my professional life, which was over a 5-year period from 2008 to 2013. I don't want to give the game away too much, but it was a really torrid time in my professional life, which then spilled over into having an impact on my personal life and mental well-being. And as I was interviewed for that piece, I realised that I'm actually not quite over it still. But at the same time, that extended period of failure over 5 years has really helped shape some of my relative successes, I would say, ever since, and has been important in guiding my decision-making going forwards. So I'd urge readers to perhaps have a sneak peek at that article, which is I Could Not Live Without. It's available online and in the print edition.
Thanks for doing that, Ian, because it's quite a brave thing to do, bare your soul in print and online. So, but a lot of people can learn from it. So, thanks for making yourself vulnerable in that way.
I definitely felt vulnerable when I was interviewed for it. It's quite emotional, actually, taking myself back to that dark time. But onwards and upwards.
Talking of which, we have a guest today.
Yeah, perfect segue into introducing our guest, Peter Greedy. Peter's an optometrist with extensive experience in management and leadership roles. He's an accredited coach who is passionate about personal, professional and leadership development, addressing toxic cultures and bringing trust and belonging into the heart of organisations. And outside of optometry, he's also the inventor and owner of an award-winning patented shoelace system.
Our podcast guest today actually has done some training for optometry today. He's recorded a practice team training video, and it's aimed at the entire practice team, so not just your professional staff, but everybody in the practice. And we have a whole series of videos online at the moment, and the one that Peter's done is called Working as a Team. So if you'd like to direct your practice staff to it, I'm sure they'll get some really useful tips out of it.
Yeah, they can register for free on the OT website for that, can't they, Kerry, the staff members, and they watch the video, answer a few MCQs, and then they get a personalised certificate to confirm that they've passed the exercise, which I think is nice for them, but also helpful for the practice to show that their team are being trained in a consistent way. Welcome, Peter. Now, it's clear from the intro I just gave to you that you've certainly had your fair share of successes, which has got you to the place where you are now with a real nice mix of experience. But I guess for most people, it's not necessarily a linear path from A to B. And I think that's perhaps a good place to start. If we could just get you to give a flavour of how have you got to where you are now, and what are some of the bumps along the way?
Yeah, sure. So perhaps a lesser known fact about me is that my whole career in optometry, you could say, started with a failure in that I actually got kicked out of dental school.
It's a juicy start, Peter.
So, when I remember as a kid doing my A-levels, and making my selections. As a kid, I was always encouraged to choose a profession. And I knew medicine would be too much study for me. And I ummed and ahed between dentistry and optometry. And I actually asked my careers advisor when I was doing my uni applications, could I put 3 dental schools and 2 optometry schools? Because it was almost on a flip of a coin. And they said, don't do that, because actually anyone who looks at that will just see you're undecided. So as it was, I plumped for dentistry first time round, and I got into Guy's dental school, which was great. And then I completely bombed. Essentially, I was in halls of residence and got distracted with another significant life event going on parallel to university. And first time round, I literally failed all 4 exams. Then I got the chance to resit. I passed 3, but I still couldn't do biochemistry to save my life. Then, so got chucked out of Guy's. I was in London. So because of my history there, I instantly applied to City University because I wanted to stay in London. Was offered a place immediately, but they were full. And they said, don't worry, just take a gap year, off you go, and we'll take you the following year. And then about 4 days before the term started, I got a phone call from admissions at City saying, we've had someone dropped out. You were like 23 on the list, but we've just decided to offer it to you. Do you want to start? And I was still living in London. I said, yes, please. I'll be there on Monday. And that was my start into optometry. So very much on the theme of failing with success. That was kind of kicked it off there.
You also referenced that that parallel life, and you've sort of left that dangling a little bit. So do you want to sort of tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so that is, it's a very important part of my history. What I like to call my story. Story is a big thing for me, and I use story a lot in my coaching work, and I actually use story a lot in my history and symptoms chats with my patients, because understanding people's stories is really important. So my story there is, I was born and raised in a vicarage. My dad's a vicar, and so I was always involved in the church as a kid. And so when I came to London, a friend of mine who was a year above me school-wise, he said, when you come to London, I want you to, come along to this group. And I thought, it's great. My brother and I used to lead the church youth group, and I thought, I'll join a CU. It'd be a good way to make friends outside of my university life, as it was. So I went along to this, and effectively, the way I summarize it now in hindsight, I was recruited into a cult. My friend had been recruited previously, and the way the recruitment process happens is that he was in a halls of residence. Some American guys from the cult got permission to go round the dorms, literally knocking on doors and inviting people to come along to this kind of evening meeting. And you were then taken through a weekly sort of introduction to, for those who might have a little bit of knowledge around church, there's a famous course called the Alpha course, which is run by a lot of evangelical churches. It was kind of similar to that. And they take you through, and one of the kind of recruitment tactics of bringing you into a cult, they call it love bombing. And basically it means you just get completely kind of constantly contacted by people who just, are attractive in terms of, they're interesting people, they're intelligent people. They were all Americans at the time and back then. So this is 1983. I was kind of, unlike now, I was a bit of an Americanophile, as it were. These guys were from the Midwest. They were kind of cowboys, and they're interesting, big kind of football playing guys. We played ultimate frisbee at the weekends. And then one of the other tactics of cult recruitment is they literally fill your life with activity. So there'd be stuff, regularly in the evenings, stuff at the weekends, stuff on Sunday. You kind of didn't have much time to do other things. And I got involved in that. I got sucked in, I suppose. And that started the journey in that cult for me. So it was a Christian organization founded in the States, and then a bunch of Americans and some Europeans planted what they called a community in London, and they had an outreach called University Christian Outreach, and that was what I got recruited into and was a member of for 6 years as part of the university outreach. And then when I got married, I met my wife through that. We got married, and then we became part of the sort of fuller, more adult, family orientated kind of community. And we were in that for 15 years. So that's partly why I would say, I got bombed out of dental school in some respects, because my life was just busy. I mean, I could do the work. I always struggled with biochemistry. It was just a nightmare of long chain carbon molecules, as far as I could tell. And I never had the brain for that. But yeah, that was part of my journey into that organization. Wasn't really aware that it was a cult. We were there for 15 years, left in 1998. Was that a mistake? I don't think so. I'm very philosophical about that. I don't like to have regrets. I think I wouldn't have met my wife, wouldn't have had the kids I've got, a whole bunch of things. It could have been a sliding doors moment, and I could have gone down a different path, but it's also led me to where I am today. And I reframe my coaching work. I don't like the word failure. And, whether you win or lose, whether you're successful or not, my view is I take a learning mindset. Everything, whether it's a win, whether it's a loss, whether it's a success or whether it's a fail, it's a learning opportunity. You learn from everything. And as long as we keep learning and move that sort of stuff forward, I think that's the positive, because none of us will get it perfect. And so it's just that journey of continuing on.
Yeah, I've certainly learned more from my failures, I would say, than successes. So that certainly chimes with me. But the optometry, as you were training to be an optometrist at City, alongside that being in the cult, that didn't, you managed to sort of balance those two things?
Yeah, so I did actually. I mean, whilst the cult was quite time consuming, it was actually full of professional people. One of the tactics, if you like, of the cult was to target university people because they're intelligent. Chances are they'll have successful careers, and therefore they're very influential people. One of the things that, if I look back at that, most of the men and women I went through university with that were involved with the cult have been extremely successful in business. let me come back to optometry because I'm talking quite a lot about that other side. Optometry, therefore, allowed me to kind of have a successful career. Having gone through university, and I was never academic, I scraped by with a 2-2. It was enough. And, I jumped straight into obviously my pre-reg and then high street practice. And I did about 10 years in optometry. But I do have a fairly low boredom threshold, and I'm very much a kind of jack of all trades kind of guy. So after about 10 years in optometry, the last 5 of which I worked for a group that's no longer around, the Ronald Brown Group. They were taken over by Scrivens, as we probably know. I was the group contact lens manager for the Ronnie Brown Group. So it was 25 practices roughly, and got on very well with Ronnie and his son Jeremy and wife Doreen. And, they were great to me. I have to say they really encouraged me, looked after me. I was running the practice in Feltham. I was a pre-reg supervisor. I was the group contact lens manager. So I was invited to be on various key opinion leader kind of things back in the day for Pilkington Barnes Hind and Bausch and Lomb, Alcon as it were, Hydron, those sorts of things. I then thought, I'd love to go more into management and leadership even back then. And because it was a family-run business, Jeremy Brown was heir apparent, and there wasn't really an opportunity, I suppose, for me to think, I could become the next, managing director or something like that. And so, through my contact lens work, I saw an opportunity basically to kind of transition, and so I started applying for professional services roles. I had a few interviews and then got hired by Bausch and Lomb. Initially self-employed on a sort of part-time, I think 3-day a week. And then shortly after that, I was taken on full-time. So I was the UK professional services manager for a few years. And then within that, again, because of, I think not so much because I like a wide variety of challenges, I suppose. I was always, within a couple of years, I was looking for, what other things could I do? So shortly after that, I became the European training director for the surgical division. So I joined Bausch in 96. That's the year I think they sold Ray-Ban to Luxottica. And with that money, they bought some surgical companies, Chiron and Storz, that make the phacoemulsification machines and had a whole range of intraocular lenses. They also bought a German company called Technolas that did lasers for, laser corrective surgery. And I got seconded into the surgical division and was running sales training for the European region. And that was really interesting to me because I got sent to America. I worked with a guy who's actually a psychologist, and we kind of developed this training program. And it was very much, I was a train the trainer kind of guy. And it was all about effectively questioning and listening skills. And kind of what you do in coaching, it's very much about helping people understand what it is they want to do, where they want to go, etc. A few years after that, then I got seconded into the IT department. And my last 6 years in Bausch and Lomb, I was European IT director, rolling out CRM, customer relationship management systems around Europe. So again, learned a whole new set of skills. I was being put through an MBA program at Henley Management College at the time. So I learned about IT project management, which was, again, another great skill set to have, and learned a lot. However, in that I was very much a misfit, because I'd never worked in IT. And since I left Bausch and Lomb in 2008, I've been self-employed.
Well, yeah, I mean, we wanted to sort of talk about how you've turned these sort of personal failures into successes, and you've certainly touched on that. You touched on being a misfit. Is in that sort of situation, is there anything you can do? I mean, we all try and fit in, and do you sort of crowbar yourself into that, or is the best thing to do to just get out of there and move on? I mean, what do you do in that situation? Do you try and change the culture from the inside?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important question, Kerry, because I think, dealing with fitting in is one of the things I actually work on actively, and actually fitting in is unhealthy in my opinion. So, in my work in leadership, I want to help people create a culture of trust and belonging. And fitting in is not a culture of belonging. Fitting in is all about changing yourself to match, the norm. And that's expressed in all sorts of ways. And actually being part of a cult or any sort of radical organization is all about fitting in. At the extreme, something like, the neo-Nazis, they have uniforms almost, they behave in the same way, they do the same gestures, they say the same stuff. But in any organization, whether it's really radical or just kind of a club, we generally, and I think social media particularly is terrible for this, we look at social media and what we see is people's best life. And then we try and copy that, but we compare that to what's going on inside us. And that gap is huge because we see all these amazing role models or lives that are broadcast there. And everyone seems to be like, oh my goodness, that's what I want to be. But then we compare that to who we really are. And there's a huge difference. And so the thing for me with belonging, which is I see as positive, versus fitting in, which I see as negative, is belonging is where you're accepted for who you are and you're not trying to be changed by the other people to kind of be molded. And that, that was definitely my experience of being in a cult. And it happens in corporations too. There's particular ways of doing things. And I think, so yeah, fitting in is I would say to in the work I do, generally, I strip it right back and I want people to think about their values and what their beliefs are, irrespective of what everyone else thinks, And a lot of that in terms of finding, Simon Sinek refers to it as finding your why, and people that look at these things like purpose and meaning and your why, most of them will say that's, and I found this really difficult to kind of comprehend myself. They say most of that is firmly embedded in you by a very young age, like 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I think, oh my goodness, how does that relate to all my experiences and stuff like that? And it takes a lot of work, therefore, to kind of journey back there a little bit to think about how was I influenced and how did that stuff work? And what's interesting is I've only started to understand that retrospectively, because we get so caught up with what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve, what our next step is. I think very few of us take time to kind of look back retrospectively with a learning mindset. It's like, what can I see? What can I do from there? So I can give you a quick example, if that's okay. I'm reading Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers book. It's fascinating. Okay, I'd highly recommend it to everyone. At one point, he talks about, I think, what they call social intelligence, and it's how we're conditioned as kids and stuff. And I was actually thinking about my own life, and I was thinking, okay, what was I like when I was 5, 6, 7, 8? And actually, at that time, I was living in a vicarage. My dad was a vicar. My mum's archetypical vicar's wife, ran everything: the Sunday school, the fairs, the women's guild, everything you can imagine. And to a large degree, my brother and I were kind of left to ourselves to do some stuff. And we had a great relationship. But also because we were in that church environment, again, it's like a mini community. So a simple example is, in terms of how it's kind of affected me in terms of confidence, I could be in church, for example, at 9 years old. The person who was on the rota to do the reading for that service, might not have showed up. And literally, sort of in the middle of the service, my dad would look at my brother or myself and give us a nod at sort of 9 years old, and that we knew that we needed to walk up to the lectern and read the lesson from the Bible, for the church. And if I think about a little thing like that, it's like, okay, so that's, well, I'm an introvert, but I'm what they call an extroverted introvert, So a lot of people see me as a confident person. I can sit and chat to you guys very easily here, whether it's recorded or not, etc. And I can stand in front of a group of people and be quite happy with that. And I know people who are paralyzed by that, But I think, okay, so that's really interesting. This one little kind of microcosm of what my life was like and how that's influenced. And I can see little influences. And there's hundreds of that for all of us, whether that's a positive experience or, a negative experience. If you're in the middle classes, you're very much enabled by your parents who are fighting for best schools for you, for best experiences for you, taking you to clubs and socials and sports and stuff. If you're not, you're left to your own devices, and that can go easily, south, or it can be quite, amazing people who become really resourceful, really creative, might become entrepreneurs, but other people can slide away and have real problems. So yeah, I think just tapping into who you are as an individual primarily, and then asking yourself that question, coming right back to the fitting in stuff in a roundabout way, do my core values and my beliefs align with the core values and beliefs of the organization within which I sit? Whether that's your job, whether that's a club, your faith, or whatever. And if it's not, I would say you're in the wrong place, actually, and you want to move on. And it doesn't mean you instantly can do that. I know I was stuck to a degree because I had a young family. Like a lot of people, I'm a professional. I'm quite good at earning money. I'm equally good, if not better, at spending money. So you end up stuck with a mortgage, with debt. And I couldn't suddenly just say, no, this place is not right for me. I'm going to quit and go somewhere else. I could not do that. But what I did then was think, okay, strategically, what could I do? How can I do that? I was able to take a voluntary redundancy because there were changes in the organization. And for me, that was absolutely the right thing. For someone else, it would have not been the right thing, and it would have worked. And that's okay. But I think you've got to, my real view here is you've got to be true to yourself. If you want to have that kind of sense of peace, contentment, a lot of people talk about happiness, whatever you want to call that. Otherwise, you're still constantly in sort of internal conflict, which I believe can lead to all sorts of other issues like, mental health issues of depression, anxiety, and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, I think digging into your values, being really clear about them. And I've evolved my values over the years. I'm very clear. My two core values are connection and contribution. And those are those drive kind of every decision I make, whether it's in my family life, whether it's in my business life, whether it's in my social life, etc. And, my own well-being, those that, I've got really clear on those. And that's from going back to my past and looking at my journey, my history, and seeing, who am I, if you like.
So, Peter, perhaps those experiences shaped why you've moved into being self-employed, because it allows you to be more agile. And if you don't feel like you're making those connections or being able to make a contribution in the way that you'd like, that you can step away and find something else rather than being committed to an organisation?
Yeah, there's a couple of factors there, Ian. One of the reasons I chose to take a voluntary redundancy was a few years before that, parallel to all of these other things, I invented something. And, actually for me at that point, it was an opportunity. I actually thought for a while that my invention would be my future professional life, which was nothing to do with optometry. I happened to invent a shoelace system that I got a patent on, and it showed great promise. And I thought, I'm going to throw myself at this. And so I've kind of partly used my redundancy money to kind of launch that business. Now, given that we've been talking about failure, I would say that also is one of my major failures. The business is still running, but it's a little cottage industry, and there's no way it's a big global brand corporation or anything. And that was because I failed dismally, because what I've learned is I'm absolutely not a good salesperson or marketing person. And I was on my own, and actually, so, again, in terms of lessons learned, I learned if I'd have done it with a partner, probably would have been much better. particularly if that partner had been somebody with some of the skills that I lacked. So that was my journey into self-employment. Originally, I thought, that's fine, I'll just step back, I've got some money, I can launch my little business. And I've had an amazing time doing that, but it's been kind of a series of, again, failures, or as I like to say, learnings, and so I've been self-employed, trying to launch that business and doing locum optometry and my other things now for 15 years. So since I left Bausch & Lomb in 2008. And so my little business, Grieper Laces, it's given me some amazing experiences. It's taken me around the world. I've been to China several times. I've been to Hawaii for the Ironman World Championships, and I've seen the winner of the race run over the finish line wearing my shoelaces in his trainers. And I've met these people, and, it's given me incredible life experiences that, again, absolutely no regrets. Is it, a multi-million corporation? Absolutely not. It's just a shoelace. And I've had loads of opportunities I've talked to shoe companies and trainer companies, and I've got a long way down the line sometimes of doing sort of a deal with them. And for whatever reason, it's never happened. And that's either just because it wasn't meant to be, or because I was not good enough at selling the product in. And that's okay. But you can still go online and buy them. But, I literally just run it from my home. I've got a shed in my back garden that holds the stock. If you need a pair of laces, I literally, some of them, because of COVID, a lot of things changed. So sometimes I literally sit there and make them up, put them in the packaging, print off the instructions, print off the order, go to the post office, stick them in the post, and you get your laces. So it's nothing glorified, like I've got a big warehouse and a big head office or anything like that. But it could have been, I think, with a different set of circumstances. But now I'm still doing my locum optometry, and interestingly, I would say I moved into kind of more formally doing coaching and leadership development as a result of COVID. So again, things, were pretty bleak at that point, because as a self-employed optometrist, I had no work for about 4 months. And again, it's like, what do you do? My wife's also self-employed. She didn't have work. It was quite scary times, actually. And it was while I had no work, I got a formal accreditation and trained up as a coach. And what's really interesting, again, I thought maybe my coaching will be in the city, it'll be in fintech, or it'll be in law or accounting, or some of the professions that could do with this. Bizarrely, actually, where I'm doing most of my coaching and leadership development is back in optometry in my own profession. Because like every business, every profession, every industry, every sector, we have problems too. And I hear stories of toxic leadership within our own profession. Particularly, we're very much part, if we got GOS contracts and I'm on the LOC, we're very much part of the NHS. And, we provide primary care service to the public. And so I'm exposed to work within the NHS. And I quoted a statistic earlier that it's horrible. But, in Gloucestershire where I work, I chat to my patients a lot when I'm doing an eye exam, and I had a lady who was in the accounts department of the NHS locally. And she was like, yes, I've been bullied. It's everywhere. And it sort of excites me with an opportunity, given where my training and skill set is, but it actually also not depresses me, because I'm not a depressive kind of person, but I'm also sort of, organizations like the NHS, they're such behemoths of organizations, and if this culture is rife throughout such a big organization, the thought of how to change that, it's like trying to turn an oil tanker. It's just, you're only ever going to get tiny little incremental changes, whereas actually it would be amazing just to be able to start from scratch and restructure the whole thing. But we know we can't do that. So trying to think about what the opportunities are there then, as a self-employed person who still considers himself part of NHS services, as a primary eye care practitioner, and also somebody who's networking there's always opportunities for something, and I'm currently still looking at what those opportunities might be.
Peter, you alluded to working story into your history and symptoms taking in practice. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you do that and how it works?
I have this thing, courageous, curious and compassionate connection. That kind of helps me describe and remember how to connect with people. The other phrase I have a lot is what I call the assumption of positive intent. And that's essentially saying that any person at any point in time is doing the best they can. And, we see some interesting characters in the chair when we're doing eye exams, and interesting characters come through the front door of our practices. Talking about fitting in, they might not fit, to some of our kind of normal stereotypes and people that we would naturally kind of be attracted to or drawn to or whatever. And what I've found by exercising that value, I'm always curious to know what's the story behind this person. That does take a bit of courage, a bit of bravery to kind of ask, some deeper questions. Obviously, you've got to be compassionate and non-judgmental. But if you take the time to ask with kindness, I generally find people are keen to tell you their story. And for a history and symptoms and doing an eye exam, we have an amazing opportunity to connect with those people. And I'm aware sometimes, I might, if I'm lucky and have a nice 40-minute eye exam slot, I might literally spend half an hour of that time just talking. But as I'm talking, I'm learning about that individual. And sometimes the service I can provide for them is just to listen and to give them some space. But also, one of the things I use a lot, and one of the easiest ways into a bit of someone's story is, part of history and symptoms is we always ask what medication people are on. I'm always amazed how many people are on antidepressants of some sort, be it citalopram, sertraline, fluoxetine, etc. And I will, the British mentality is kind of a little bit, I think it's changing with the generations, but certainly my generation, we have a funny relationship with mental health, which isn't a good relationship with mental health, in my opinion. And actually just being brave enough, having that courage to say, is that for anxiety or a depression or whatever? Because they'll tell you the medication, but if you ask about their general health, you say, how are you? And they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm fine, And then you ask for their medication, they'll give you one of the antidepressants in their list, or just that might be the only thing they're on. And they're just asking kindly, can you just explain, is that for whatever it is? And that is a little door into often quite another bunch of conversations. I've had people really open up to me, tell me about family problems. I had one lady who told me she was really struggling because her daughter was in a cult, and that opened up a fantastic conversation for us because she was really struggling. She wasn't allowed to see her daughter or her grandchildren or all sorts of stuff. And that connection, it does two things. Number one, it serves that person because it really helps them. But actually, I think, and this isn't cynical, it's good for business, actually, because if you're able to connect with that person, you will gain a client for life in your practice, because very few people will connect with them in that way. So yeah, I think making the most of history and symptoms, not rushing through that, just taking a bit of time. And of course, you might find people are reluctant to talk about certain history, whether they've had a stroke or whether they've had a heart attack or whether they've had, whatever. And all of a sudden you get little insights to their general health that we might be able to then detect some signs of that in their eyes when we do, when we look at their fundus. And it builds that much bigger, fuller picture of the people that we're serving through our profession.
I think the history and symptoms taking is something I learnt to do far too late, really. I thought it was about filling in these boxes as accurately as possible and as speedily getting the exact information from that patient and getting it in the box. I think I came to that sort of patient-centred examination a bit too late, really. I could,
And Peter, you've clearly got a very, very full life with being an optometrist and the leadership work and running the small scale shoelace business. But perhaps we could finish on talking about your work for Vision Care for Homeless People as well, which you seem to find time to also fit into the mix.
So yeah, as I said, jack of all trades. so I've got lots of things going on. So I'm chair of the Gloucester branch of Vision Care for Homeless People, and I've been involved in that since kind of before it was up and running. So through a colleague that I met through my locum work, a local optometrist in the Gloucestershire area, who actually now is an optometrist but also works for Vision Care for Homeless People a couple of days a week. Karen, she's delightful. I kind of reached out to them. I saw an advert for it. I don't remember where now. It was a couple of years ago, and yeah, I just reached out and said, "Oh, I'm interested to do that." I do have this. I told you one of my core values are connection and contribution, and it's really aligns with that second value of contribution. And in the past, I've done a couple of trips to Africa, a couple of different African countries, doing sort of vision work overseas. And I just thought, well, actually, here's an opportunity just to do it on my doorstep. I approached them and they said, "Oh, yes, we'd love someone like you to be involved. Do you want to be chair?" And I was like, I was a little bit reluctant, because one of the things I'm also aware of in my work is my own privilege. I'm cis, straight, white, male, tall, educated, middle class. I've got the royal flush of privilege. To then be a chair, if you like, of a little organisation, I was slightly reluctant. So I've kind of made a commitment to myself, I suppose, in that I will try and work to facilitate any succession for a role like that I might have, to be not another person from my demographic, but that's a separate aside sort of value that I'm trying to fulfill. But essentially, as an organisation, it's fantastic, and they're actually rapidly expanding. And if I might take the opportunity to give them a little plug, as it were, because they've got 7 clinics active at the moment. They're about to open the 8th, but they've got an ambitious plan to have 20 clinics up and running within 5 years from now. And so anyone can volunteer, and I try and do 1 clinic a month. So it's not a massive commitment. But I'll go over to Gloucester where the clinic is. We're very lucky in Gloucester, an organisation called Gloucester City Mission that does a lot of work with homeless, has a nice kind of old building that is their kind of permanent place. And they very kindly gave us a room to set up as a clinic. So it's literally set up as an eye testing room. We're fully set up there. So we offer free eye exams and free glasses. And we've also got things like eye drops and stuff that we can give out to anyone who qualifies as homeless. Because one of the challenges, once you're in that scenario, if you don't have a home address, you then can't claim benefits. So you can't tick a box saying I'm on this benefit or that benefit. A lot of them are on no benefits or whatever. So for whatever reason, they fall through that net, if you like. And so Vision Care for Homeless People is there to kind of pick those people up. And so some of them, are delightful. Well, frankly, I've not met, an unpleasant person yet through that. They're delightful. And coming back to a point I made earlier, they all have a story. And some of those stories are really sad, hard, we had a delightful young family in, they're a young professional family from Syria, and they're amazing people. But that story, their house was trashed and they left the country with a couple of suitcases, nothing, all their savings gone, all their belongings gone, everything, and so it just it gives you an insight into, we often use the term first world problems, and I think, we within our profession are so privileged. We have good jobs, we have good careers. Generally, we're all very fortunate and should be really grateful for the lives that we have. And I think anyone, therefore, if you've got a chance to give back a little bit, pay it forward or whatever you want to say, you know, there's lots of different ways. Vision care for homeless people within our profession is just one of them. We know there's a lot of great vision care charities, and that's amazing. So yeah, for me it's a real privilege to be involved and to just see how we can really make an impact and change some people's lives for the good.
Peter, I think that's a really nice place to wrap things up. So I just want to thank you for your time, and in particular for sharing some of your vulnerabilities throughout this podcast.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Happy to share it.
Thank you very much indeed.